I've been working as a forest ranger in Northern California's Shasta Trinity National Forest for nearly 15 years now. It's a job I love, mostly because of the isolation. It's peaceful, no crowds, no noise, just me and the wilderness. I've been stationed all over the forest, from more popular spots around the Shasta Lake to the deeper, more remote areas near the Trinity Alps, where you hardly see a soul. I've seen my fair share of strange things out here, from odd lights in the sky to animals behaving in ways they shouldn't, but nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened last year. I wasn't even supposed to be at Firewatch Station 4 that weekend. That station, located deep within the most remote part of the forest, hadn't been manned for weeks. Normally it's the kind of place you can go months without checking, but a series of summer storms had rolled through the area, and there'd been some concern about lightning strikes. The higher-ups wanted a quick inspection to make sure no fires had sparked. I volunteered for it. What can I say? I've always liked solitude, and spending a few days alone in a Firewatch station, surrounded by nothing but wilderness, seemed like the perfect getaway from the chaos of the world. Plus, it wasn't like I hadn't done this 100 times before. How hard could it be? Turns out I should have kept my mouth shut. The hike to Firewatch Station 4 isn't easy. It's a solid 20-mile trek from the nearest road, a narrow dirt path winding through some of the densest parts of the forest. Most of the hike is uphill, and you gain about 3,000 feet of elevation by the time you reach the station. That Friday, the weather was decent, though dark clouds had started gathering on the horizon, promising rain later on. I figured I'd make it to the station before the storm hit. I was about 5 miles in when I first felt it, this sense of being watched. Now, I've spent enough time in the woods to know when I'm alone and when I'm not. I've had run-ins with all sorts of animals over the years, bears, mountain lions, coyotes, but this was different. I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was tracking me. I'd stop every now and then, pretending to adjust my pack, just to listen. Nothing. Just the sound of the wind rustling the leaves and the occasional call of a bird. I pressed on, ignoring the uneasy feeling gnawing at the back of my mind. It took me most of the day to reach the station. By the time I got there, the sky had darkened with thick storm clouds, and a light rain had begun to fall. The station itself was a small, single-room cabin perched on a ridge with a decent view of the surrounding forest. The place hadn't changed much since the last time I'd been there. A little run-down, but still solid. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, setting my pack down near the old wooden table that doubled as a workstation. I spent the next hour or so checking the place over, making sure the radio worked and inspecting the area for any signs of fire. Everything seemed in order, but that uneasy feeling hadn't left me. If anything, it had gotten worse. It was like I could feel eyes on me, watching from the tree line just out of sight. I even stepped outside a few times, scanning the forest, but I never saw anything. By nightfall, the rain had picked up, and the wind was howling through the trees. I figured I'd call it a night and get an early start the next morning, maybe do a quick patrol of the area before heading back. I locked the door, lit a fire in the old stove, and settled into the bunk near the window, trying to shake the feeling of unease that had followed me all day. That's when I heard a strange noise. At first, I thought it was the wind, a low, deep, moaning sound coming from the woods. But as I lay there listening, I realized it wasn't the wind. It was something else, something alive. It sounded like a howl, only deeper, more guttural, like nothing I'd ever heard before. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest, straining to hear over the storm. The howl came again, closer this time. I jumped out of bed and grabbed my flashlight, flicking it on as I moved toward the window. The rain was coming down hard now, making it difficult to see much beyond the first few trees. I scanned the forest, trying to pinpoint where the sound was coming from, but the howling had stopped. For a few minutes, everything was quiet, except for the sound of the rain drumming against the roof. And then I saw something. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, a trick of the light playing on my nerves. But then it moved. A massive, hulking figure standing just at the edge of the tree line. It was tall, easily over 7 feet, maybe more, and covered in thick, dark hair. I could see its outline in the dim light, broad shoulders and long arms that hung almost to its knees. It stood there, perfectly still, watching the cabin. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. A bear? No, it was too tall, too upright. A man? No, it was too big, too wild. Then, as if it realized I'd seen it, the figure turned and disappeared into the trees. I don't know how long I stood there, staring out the window, waiting for it to come back. Part of me wanted to believe I'd imagined the whole thing, that it was just a trick of the shadows and my overactive imagination. But deep down, I knew better. I'd heard stories about Bigfoot before. Hell, everyone who works in these woods has. Most of us just laugh it off, chalking it up to campfire tales and overhyped myths. But now standing in that cabin, I wasn't so sure anymore. The storm raged on outside, and I eventually forced myself to lie back down, though sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure again, standing there, watching, waiting. The next morning, the storm had died down, but the sky was still overcast, and the air felt heavy with the promise of more rain. I packed my gear quickly, deciding to cut my stay short and head back to the main road. The radio in the cabin had been on the fritz, and I hadn't been able to get a signal out to the station, but I wasn't too worried about that. My satellite phone was fully charged, and I figured I could make a call once I was a few miles down the trail and in a better position. But as I stepped outside, I felt that same unsettling sensation, like I was being watched. I scanned the forest again, half expecting to see that figure standing there, but there was nothing, just the trees swaying in the wind. I started down the trail, moving at a brisk pace, my eyes darting to the trees every few steps. The forest felt different now, more menacing. The usual sounds of wildlife, birds chirping, squirrels chattering, were gone. The only sound was the crunch of my boots on the wet earth and the occasional creak of a tree in the wind. After about an hour of hiking, I decided to take a quick break and check in with the station. I reached into my pack for the satellite phone, and my heart sank. It was gone. At first, I thought I'd just misplaced it, maybe stuffed it in the wrong pocket. But after tearing through my pack, I realized the truth. I must have dropped it somewhere along the trail. I cursed under my breath, debating whether I should turn back to look for it or keep going. The idea of backtracking didn't sit well with me, not with whatever had been out there last night. But without the phone, I had no way of contacting anyone, no way of calling for help if I needed it. I stood there for a minute, trying to decide what to do, when I heard it again, the howl. This time, it was much closer, maybe a few hundred yards away, echoing through the trees. My blood ran cold as the sound washed over me. I could feel it in my chest, deep and primal, like something out of a nightmare. I grabbed my pack and started moving, faster this time, almost running down the trail. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my breath came in ragged gasps, but I didn't dare slow down. Every few minutes I'd hear it again, that low, guttural howl, closer and closer each time. It was following me. I don't know how long I ran for, but eventually I had to stop. My legs were burning and my lungs felt like they were about to explode. I stumbled to a stop near a fallen log, leaning against it as I tried to catch my breath. The forest was eerily silent now, save for the occasional drip of rainwater from the leaves above. I listened, straining to hear any sign of movement, but there was nothing. No howling, no footsteps. Just the quiet hum of the forest. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd lost it, that whatever had been following me had given up. But then I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. There, standing no more than 50 feet away, partially hidden behind the thick trunk of an ancient pine, was the same figure from the night before. My heart felt like it stopped in my chest. This time I could see it more clearly. It wasn't just a shadow or some trick of the light. It was real, a creature, massive, covered in matted dark hair, with eyes that seemed far too intelligent for something so primal. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I could feel its gaze locked on me. I stood frozen, unsure of what to do. If I ran, would it chase me? If I stayed still, would it lose interest and disappear back into the woods? Every instinct in my body screamed for me to run, but my legs felt like lead, refusing to cooperate. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, the forest around us impossibly quiet. It was only when the creature shifted slightly, its enormous head tilting as if studying me, that I found the strength to move. I don't know why I did it. Maybe some part of me thought it was the right move, but I slowly raised my hands, palms out, like you would to calm down a spooked animal. I took a cautious step backward, keeping my eyes on the creature the whole time. It didn't react. It just stood there, watching, as I took another step back, then another. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what this thing wanted, why it hadn't attacked yet. Was it curious? Territorial? Was it waiting for something? Just when I thought I might have a chance to get away, the creature moved. Fast. 1 second it was standing behind the tree, the next it was stepping out into full view. My blood ran cold as I realized just how massive it was. Its head nearly brushed the lower branches of the trees, and its arms were long, unnaturally so, hanging well past its knees. It let out a low, rumbling growl, a sound that made my skin crawl. This was no curious animal. This thing was a predator, and I was in its territory. I bolted. My legs finally obeyed, and I ran faster than I ever thought possible. The trail was slick from the rain, and I nearly slipped a dozen times, but I didn't dare slow down. My only thought was to get as far away from that thing as I could. Behind me, I could hear it crashing through the underbrush. It was fast, far faster than something that size should have been, but it wasn't charging directly at me. It was keeping pace, staying just out of sight, like it was hurting me, guiding me deeper into the forest. Panic clawed at my mind as I realized the creature wasn't trying to catch me, at least not yet. It was playing with me like a cat with a mouse, and I had no idea where it was leading me. After what felt like hours of running, I burst into a small clearing. My legs were shaking and I could barely catch my breath, but I forced myself to keep going, scanning the area for anything I could use to defend myself. There was nothing, just trees, rocks, and the endless expanse of wilderness. I stumbled toward a large boulder near the edge of the clearing and crouched behind it, trying to quiet my gasping breaths. My mind was racing, trying to come up with some kind of plan, but the truth was, I had no idea what to do. I was alone, without a weapon, without a phone, and with a creature straight out of a nightmare stalking me through the woods. For a few moments, everything was silent. I strained to listen, hoping, praying that maybe the creature had lost track of me. But deep down, I knew it was still out there, waiting. I was right. The silence was broken by the sound of branches snapping, followed by a heavy, deliberate footstep. It was close, too close. My heart pounded in my ears as I peeked around the edge of the boulder. There it was, standing at the edge of the clearing, its massive form barely visible through the mist that had started to settle in. It wasn't moving, just standing there, watching. I felt a wave of hopelessness wash over me. I couldn't outrun it. I couldn't fight it. I was trapped. Then, without warning, the creature let out a deafening roar, a sound so powerful it seemed to shake the very ground beneath me. I clamped my hands over my ears, wincing in pain as the sound echoed through the clearing. When I opened my eyes again, the creature was gone. For a long moment, I just sat there, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had it given up? Was it toying with me again, letting me think I had a chance to escape? I didn't wait to find out. I forced myself to stand, my legs trembling beneath me, and started moving again. I wasn't sure where I was going, but staying in the clearing felt like a death sentence. As I stumbled through the forest, my thoughts kept returning to the creature's behavior. It had every opportunity to attack me, to kill me, but it hadn't. Instead, it had stalked me, watched me like it was waiting for something. Then, like a bolt of lightning, the realization hit me. It wasn't alone. My stomach twisted as the full weight of that thought sank in. The creature, whatever it was, had been leading me somewhere. Not away from danger, but toward it. Towards them. I was no longer dealing with one Bigfoot. There were more out there, possibly an entire group, and I had walked straight into their hunting grounds. I had to get out. Now. The forest was growing darker by the minute as the storm clouds thickened overhead. The wind had picked up again, whipping through the trees and carrying with it the faint sound of distant howls. More than one this time. I wasn't alone anymore. I stumbled down the trail, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. How many were out there? How long had they been following me? Was there any way I could get out of here alive? Then I saw it. A flicker of movement up ahead, just beyond the next rise in the trail. I slowed down, squinting through the gloom, and my heart nearly stopped. Standing in the middle of the trail, blocking my path, was another one. This one was smaller than the first, but just as intimidating, with thick black fur and those same intelligent, predatory eyes. I froze, my mind screaming at me to run, but I knew there was nowhere to go. If I turned back, I'd run straight into the others. If I moved forward, I'd be walking straight into the jaws of death. And then, without a sound, it moved. Silently, swiftly like a shadow stepping off the trail and disappearing into the trees. For a second, I was too stunned to move. It could have attacked me right then and there, but it hadn't. Why? What were they waiting for? I didn't have time to figure it out. I had to keep moving. By now, the light was fading fast, and the forest was becoming a maze of shadows. I couldn't tell if the creatures were still following me, or if they were waiting somewhere up ahead, but I knew they weren't done with me yet. The trail was becoming harder to follow, the rain turning the dirt into thick, slick mud. My boots slipped with every step, and I had to grab onto tree trunks to keep from falling. The wind was howling now, the storm finally hitting full force, and I could barely see more than a few feet in front of me. Then, in the distance, I saw it, the faint, flickering light of a fire. Hope surged through me. as I realized what it was. Another firewatch station, one that wasn't on the map. Maybe there was a ranger there, someone who could help, someone with a radio or a phone. Maybe I wasn't alone after all. I scrambled toward the light, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The creatures were still out there. I could feel it, but I was so close now, so close to safety. But as I reached the edge of the clearing where the light was coming from, I realized something was wrong. The fire wasn't in a station, it was in a clearing, surrounded by stones and something else. Bones. The fire flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the ground. The clearing was littered with bones, large ones like elk or deer, maybe something bigger. And among them, scattered like trophies, were pieces of human clothing, shredded jackets, torn boots, and a ranger's hat. The smell hit me then, a sickly sweet stench of rot and decay that turned my stomach. I stumbled back, my eyes wide with horror as I realized what I was looking at. This wasn't a firewatch station, it was a feeding ground, and I had walked straight into it. Before I could react, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate, coming from the trees behind me. I turned, my heart pounding in my chest, and saw them. 3 of them, stepping out of the shadows, their eyes glowing in the firelight. They were bigger than I had imagined, their massive forms towering over me as they moved closer, their breath steaming in the cold night air. I was trapped. There was no way out, and in that moment, as I stood there surrounded by these creatures, I realized the awful truth. I wasn't the hunter, I was the prey. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. All those years in the wilderness, all those hours spent learning how to track, hunt, and survive, I'd thought I was at the top of the food chain. But now, surrounded by these towering figures, I knew that I was wrong. These creatures, they weren't just animals, they were something else, something more dangerous, more intelligent. And they had been leading me to this moment from the start. The 3 Bigfoot circled the clearing, their glowing eyes never leaving me. I could hear the crackling of the fire behind me, but it was little comfort. The clearing that had seemed like a beacon of hope just minutes ago was now nothing more than a trap. There was no escape. I backed up slowly, my breath coming in shallow gasps, my eyes darting between the creatures as they moved in closer. Every instinct in my body screamed for me to run, but my legs were frozen. My mind raced, searching for some kind of plan, some way out, but I was out of options. I was exhausted, out of food, and had no more matches to light another fire. And now, I was facing creatures far stronger and faster than I could ever hope to be. One of the creatures, the biggest of the 3, the one I had first seen, let out a low growl. It stepped forward, its massive body casting a long shadow across the clearing. The others stopped, watching intently, as if waiting for its lead. I clenched my fists, feeling the cold bite of the wind on my skin. If this was it, if this was the end, I wasn't going to go down without a fight. But just as the creature was about to step into the circle of firelight, something strange happened. It stopped. For a moment, it stood perfectly still, its head tilting to the side, as if it was listening to something. The others did the same, their attention shifting from me to the darkness beyond the trees. My heart was pounding in my chest. What were they doing? Then I heard it, a distant rumble, low and faint, at first barely distinguishable from the wind, but it grew louder with each passing second, a steady rhythmic sound that sent a shiver down my spine. Footsteps. Not just any footsteps, though. These were heavy, deliberate, like something massive was moving through the forest. Something even bigger than the creatures that now stood frozen in the clearing. The Bigfoot closest to me let out a sharp grunt, and in an instant the others turned and vanished into the trees. 1 second they were there, the next they were gone, disappearing into the darkness like ghosts. I stood there, stunned, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. Why had they left? What could have possibly scared away? Then the ground shook beneath my feet, and I knew. From the darkness at the far end of the clearing, a shape emerged. At first it was just a shadow, barely visible against the backdrop of the forest, but as it stepped into the dim light of the fire, I felt my stomach drop. It was another one of them, but this one was different, bigger, much bigger. It stood at least 9 feet tall, its hulking frame covered in thick, matted fur. Its eyes glowed a deep, unnatural red, and its hands, if you could even call them hands, were massive, with long, gnarled fingers that ended in claws. This wasn't just another Bigfoot. This was something else, something far more dangerous. For a moment, it stood there, staring at me with those glowing red eyes, its breath coming in slow, heavy bursts. The air around it seemed to grow colder, and I could feel the weight of its presence bearing down on me like a physical force. I wanted to move, to run, to do something, but I couldn't. My legs were locked in place, my body paralyzed with fear. The creature took a step forward, its massive foot sinking into the mud with a deep, wet. Then another, and another. Each step was deliberate, calculated, like it was savoring the moment, drawing out the inevitable. As it moved closer, I could see more details. Its face, though vaguely human, was twisted, almost grotesque. Its jaw jutted forward, revealing rows of sharp, uneven teeth. Its eyes, burning with that eerie red glow, seemed to pierce right through me, like it could see into my very soul. I was going to die here. Suddenly, the creature stopped, just a few feet away from me. It tilted its head again, its nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air. Then, to my horror, it leaned down, its massive face coming within inches of mine. The smell hit me first, a rancid stench of decay and wet fur that made me gag. I could feel its hot breath on my skin, each exhale slow and deliberate, as if it was trying to decide what to do with me. For a second, everything went quiet. The wind stopped, the fire barely flickered, and even the forest seemed to hold its breath. Then, without warning, the creature let out a deafening roar, so loud and so powerful that I could feel it vibrating in my chest. My ears rang, and my vision blurred as the force of the sound washed over me. But in that moment, whether out of instinct or sheer terror, I did the only thing I could. I ran. I don't know how I managed it. One second I was standing there, frozen in place, and the next I was sprinting through the trees, my legs moving on autopilot. The forest blurred around me as I ran blindly into the night, branches slashing at my face and arms, the mud sucking at my boots with every step. Behind me, I could hear the creature crashing through the underbrush, its heavy footsteps shaking the ground as it followed in hot pursuit. It was faster than I could have imagined, and the sound of its breathing, deep and guttural, grew louder with every second. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I knew that if I did, it would be the last thing I ever saw. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, an endless maze of trees and darkness. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like they were going to give out at any moment. But I forced myself to keep going. I had to. If I stopped, even for a second, it would catch me. Just when I thought I couldn't go any farther, I saw it, a faint glow in the distance, barely visible through the thick fog that had settled over the forest. I didn't know what it was, but it didn't matter. It was my only chance. With the last of my strength, I sprinted toward the light, my heart pounding in my chest. The creature was right behind me now, so close that I could hear its claws scraping against the rocks and roots as it closed the gap. I burst into another clearing, my eyes wide with desperation. And there, standing in the middle of the clearing, was a ranger's truck. A real one. Not a mirage, not a hallucination. A goddamn truck. I stumbled toward it, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the door. I yanked it open and threw myself inside, slamming it shut behind me just as the creature reached the edge of the clearing. For a split second, we locked eyes through the windshield. Its glowing red eyes burned with fury, and I could see the raw, primal rage etched across its twisted face. Then, with a roar, it slammed its fist into the hood of the truck, the metal buckling under the force. I screamed, turning the key in the ignition with trembling hands. The engine sputtered once, then roared to life. I didn't wait. I slammed my foot on the gas, the tires spinning in the mud for a split second before catching traction. The truck lurched forward, and I sped out of the clearing, not daring to look back. I could still hear the creature's roars echoing through the trees as I sped down the narrow, winding trail, the rain pounding against the windshield. But I didn't care. I was alive. I don't remember much of the drive back. Everything after that point is a blur. The storm, the road, the forest. I barely registered any of it. All I knew was that I had to get as far away from that place as possible. When I finally reached the ranger station, it was well past midnight. I stumbled out of the truck, soaked to the bone and covered in mud, my body trembling from exhaustion and shock. The other rangers were already inside, looking over maps and discussing the storm. They looked up when I came in, their faces filled with concern, but I couldn't find the words to explain what had happened. All I could say was one thing, over and over. They're out there, and they're hunting. To this day, I don't go near Firewatch Station 4. I've been reassigned to a different area of the forest, one that's closer to the main roads and more populated campsites. But even now, every time I'm alone in the woods, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls through the trees, I think I can still hear them out there, waiting, watching, hunting,